What does it mean to lose yourself in a world that demands you wear a mask of perfection? To feel like you're suffocating under a glass dome while everyone around you seems to breathe freely. Today we are diving deep into Sylvia Plath's haunting novel, The Bell Jar. Not just as a piece of literature, but as a profound philosophical exploration of identity, authenticity, and what it truly means to be free in a world that often feels like a beautiful prison. This video is part of our ongoing reading challenge series, where we explore books that don't just tell stories, but ask the big questions about what it means to be human. And The Bell Jar does exactly that. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about society, mental health, and the price we pay for trying to fit into spaces that weren't made for us. To understand The Bell Jar, we first need to understand Sylvia Plath herself, because this novel is as much autobiography as it is fiction. Plath was born in 1932, a brilliant mind trapped in a world that had very specific ideas about what women could and should be. She was a gifted poet, a straight A student at Smith College, and by all external measures, the perfect 1950s young woman. But beneath that polished surface, she was drowning. The 50s were a particularly suffocating time for women. The post-war era had pushed women back into domestic roles after they had tasted independence during World War II. Society painted a picture of feminine fulfillment through marriage and motherhood. So intellectually hungry and artistically driven, this felt like a kind of silent death. Plath struggled with severe depression throughout her life, and she understood intimately what it felt like to be trapped under what she called the bell jar. So that invisible barrier that separates you from life itself. She wrote The Bell Jar in early 60s, drawing directly from her own experiences of breakdown and recovery. And tragically, Plath took her own life in 1963, just a month after The Bell Jar was published in the UK. And she was only 30 years old. But her voice, raw, honest, and uncompromising, continues to speak to anyone who has ever felt like they were suffocating in plain sight. Her life gives weight to every page of this novel, because she lived these questions, wrestled with them, and ultimately paid the highest price for her inability to find peace with them. The Bell Jar follows Esther Greenwood, a 19-year-old college student who wins an internship at a fashion magazine in New York City. On paper, this is the dream. Glamorous city, prestigious opportunity, the kind of experience that should set her up for a brilliant future. But from the very first pages, we sense something is wrong. Esther moves through her life like she's sleepwalking, watching herself from the outside, unable to connect with the experiences that should be thrilling her. The parties feel hollow, the work feels meaningless, and the other girls around her seem to inhabit a world she can't access. She finally returns home to the suburbs, expecting to spend the summer writing and preparing for her senior year. Instead, she discovers she has been rejected from a writing program she had counted on. With no backup plan, no structure, she finds herself adrift in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by expectations she can no longer meet. And this is where the real descent begins. Esther stops sleeping, stops bathing, stops caring for herself in the most basic ways. The true picture of depression. She feels like she's trapped under a bell jar. She can see life happening around her, but she can't participate in it. The air feels thick and stale, and every breath is an effort. Her mother, desperate and confused, eventually gets her psychiatric help. Esther endures brutal electroshock treatments, patronizing doctors, and well-meaning but clueless family members who just want her to snap out of it. She even attempts swallowing pills and hiding in a basement crawl space, hoping to simply disappear. The novel follows her through hospitalization, therapy, and the slow, uncertain process of recovery. But this isn't a neat story of triumph over adversity. Plath is simply too honest for that. Instead, she shows us how fragile recovery is, how the bell jar might lift but never disappears completely. It just hovers, ready to descend again. The power of this story isn't in its plot, but in how it captures something universal about the experience of feeling disconnected from your own life, of going through motions that everyone else seems to find meaningful while you feel like you're drowning in plain sight. Now, let's dig into what makes this novel philosophically fascinating. Because The Bell Jar isn't just about depression, it's about fundamental questions of identity, freedom, and authenticity that philosophers have wrestled with for centuries. Esther's breakdown isn't just psychological, it's truly existential. She's facing what the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre called the burden of radical freedom. Esther looks at her life and realizes she doesn't know who she is beneath all the roles she has been playing. The good student, the accomplished young woman, the dutiful daughter. There is a powerful moment in the novel where Esther imagines her life as a fig tree, a very famous scene, with each branch representing a different possible future, like marriage, career, travel, or motherhood. But instead of feeling excited by these possibilities, she's paralyzed by them. She watches the figs wither and fall because she can't choose, can't commit to any single path without feeling like she's killing off all the other possible selves she could become. This is classic existential anxiety, the terror and responsibility that comes with realizing you have to create yourself, that there is no predetermined essence or path you are meant to follow. Simone de Beauvoir wrote extensively about this burden, particularly for women who were expected to find their identity through others rather than creating it for themselves. Esther represents a generation of women caught between old expectations and new possibilities. And that tension literally drives her to the breaking point. One of the most unsettling questions the Bell Jar raises is this: what if what we call madness is actually a sane response to an insane world? Michel Foucault spent his career examining how societies define madness and normalcy, and how those definitions often serve to silence dissent and maintain power structures. When we look at Esther's world, the suffocating gender roles, the shallow materialism, and the pressure to conform, her breakdown starts to look less like illness and more like rebellion. Esther can't pretend to be excited about the things she's supposed to want. She can't fake enthusiasm for marriage prospects or career paths that feel like prisons. In a world that demands performance of happiness, her refusal to perform becomes pathologized. And this doesn't mean depression isn't real or doesn't need treatment. Plath herself struggled with severe mental illness, but the novel asks us to consider how much of what we call mental health problems might actually be responses to unhealthy social conditions. The 50s painted a very specific picture of female fulfillment: marriage, motherhood, domesticity. But what happens to women who wanted more or different or simply wanted to choose for themselves? Esther embodies the contradiction faced by educated women of that era. She has been told she can achieve anything, but the actual options available to her are incredibly narrow. She can be a wife, a mother, or perhaps a career woman, but not a fully realized human being with complex desires and ambitions. The Bell Jar becomes a perfect metaphor for this trap. It looks transparent, like freedom should be possible, but every time you try to move forward, you hit invisible barriers. You can see the world, but you can't touch it, can't affect it, and can't fully participate in it. This resonates far beyond the 50s, because how many of us have felt trapped by expectations, mainly family expectations, cultural expectations, our own internalized ideas about who we are supposed to be. Surely the specific pressures might have changed, but the fundamental experience of feeling suffocated by roles that don't fit remains incredibly relevant. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of Plath's metaphor is how it captures the experience of depression itself, not just as individual pathology, but as a response to disconnection from authentic life. Under the Bell Jar, everything looks distorted. Colors seem faded, sounds are muffled, and you feel cut off from the immediate experience of being alive. You go through the emotions of living, but it feels like you are watching someone else's life through thick glass. This metaphor speaks to anyone who has felt disconnected from their own existence, whether through depression, anxiety, trauma, or simply the grinding alienation of modern life. It captures the sense of being present, but not really there, of being surrounded by life, but unable to participate in it fully. The genius of Plath's metaphor is that it shows how personal suffering is often tied to larger social and existential realities. The bell jar isn't just in Esther's head, it's created by the gap between her authentic self and the world's demands for conformity. 70 years after it was written, the bell jar remains painfully relevant. We live in an era of curated social media lives where the pressure to perform happiness and success has only intensified. Young people today face their own impossible choices like career, family, authenticity, or acceptance. Mental health conversations have evolved dramatically since Plath's time, but we are still grappling with the same fundamental questions. How do we live authentically in a world that rewards conformity? How do we create meaning when traditional structures feel hollow? How do we find ourselves when we are constantly being told who we should be? And finally, the bell jar reminds us that feeling trapped, confused, or disconnected doesn't make us broken. It makes us human. And before we wrap up, let me tell you about our next book in the reading challenge. Next month, we are diving into Éric Maria Remarque, All Quiet on the Western Front, a devastating exploration of how war destroys not just bodies but souls, and what it means to come of age when the world itself seems to have gone insane. And of course now a hint about the book for November. It's an American epic that asks whether people are fundamentally good or evil. It explores the weight of family legacy and the possibility of choosing your own moral path. And it suggests that maybe we have the power to overcome the sins of our fathers and create something better. If you found this exploration meaningful, I would love for you to check out my recent video on the dark side of empathy, where we examine how our capacity for understanding others can sometimes become its own kind of prison. So until next time, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give me a like and a subscription if you'd like to see more videos like this somewhere in the future. Have a nice day and a nice week. Goodbye.